All right. Good morning, everyone. This is Sri. Happy Wednesday. Thanks for joining. We have a lot of exciting stuff to share, and Shiva has already started his screen sharing. So, Shiva, if you're ready, over to you.
Thank you, Srikanth. Good morning, everyone. Good to be back here. I'm going to basically kind of start off by essentially kind of two things, which is we basically passed SOC 2 Type 2 compliance. So we basically gone through the entire audit cycle, which is basically done once every 3 months, and then it will basically, it does the compliance. So we have SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, and we've received the certificates. GDPR compliance, we've passed the compliance, but we are basically waiting for the final certificate on it. So both of these certificates are with us, and in case anybody needs it for their this thing, we have a process by which we can basically you can sign an NDA and get the copy of those. So from a compliance perspective, we are there. And one of the reasons that I'm stating this is because we've been kind of locked up because of this whole SOC 2 Type 2 compliance period for the past 15 days in terms of like not being able to add people into JIT, etc., because of all the compliances that are required during the audit period. So things have been a little slow, but basically we hope to pick up speed. So I'm just going to share some few updates, top level updates, but then I'll get to the meat of the session, which is basically the part where I want feedback from a lot of you. One is essentially a feature that's been kind of long requested, which was there earlier, but this thing, the ability to create your own custom domain name. We've now essentially kind of given the ability to create a custom domain name, and you essentially have the ability to create your domain. You create your SSL certificate and SSL private key, and you can essentially create the A record. And we've given you the links for the different service providers. How do you create an A record over there, so that in case basically somebody in your team is not aware of how to do it, they can essentially use it. But overall, this feature is now live, and you can essentially kind of point it to your own domain, and then essentially with the white labeling options that you have within the screen. So after that, the customer will not see anything that basically belongs to Connect Secure itself. So let us know your feedback. Try the new domain, and basically in case you are good with it, please be this. Second, from an Azure AD perspective, we all know the GDAP changes that have been rolling down from Microsoft, and one of the things that essentially it kind of put at risk, and we were very worried whether we would meet the deadline or not. I would like to call out Chuck from Synaptic IT and Jason Whitehurst, who basically were pivotal in helping us getting access to accounts, which basically allowed us to essentially test this out completely and basically make it functional. So a big thank you to both of you. But essentially now you have Azure AD Legacy, and then what we're calling as Azure AD non-CSP and CSP. So if you're CSP, you get into Azure AD CSP. And remember that in CSP, now you have to create two applications. One basically within the partner portal. This application within the partner portal allows us to essentially pull the list of customers for you from a CSP perspective. And the second application within your Azure Active Directory, where you have to provide consent on a per customer basis to essentially get data in terms of users and computers, etc., from the Azure AD CSP. Second, the reason that is significant for us is because with this change that has been put together, we also will be able to enhance. We are basically almost done with what we are calling as a cloud security offering that we've been working with Jason on. And so this application will allow us to kind of move you into that domain where we can give you more about cloud security, which includes SharePoint, all of those pieces, and full compliance details. And so those essentially are the features that we are essentially bringing in very shortly. And this is essentially part of this. So, so as I said, in the case of a CSP integration, you have to create an application in the Microsoft Partner Center. We have detailed documentation on this. And basically, you have to create an application in Azure Active Directory. And in the case of, and here basically for when you map the companies, once you get the list of companies, you have to essentially kind of click on each of these companies to provide consent. And this, unfortunately, is something that Microsoft is mandating, and we are essentially kind of using this. We have to basically adhere to this mandate. Okay. The work again, these are the company mappings and all of that stuff. And then the CSP, you basically have to just create one application and you can essentially get into this. So this essentially has been done. So I'm just not going to go deeply into this. Second is that there was a request from a few of you saying that you want to be able to manually deprecate an agent. So for whatever reason, you essentially want to kind of say that this agent is deprecated or has been replaced, whatever it is. But we essentially have given you the mechanism to manually deprecate an agent. And in case it is restored, in case it is not supposed to be deprecated, it was done by mistake, it can be restored back at any point of time. So these, and also basically you can bulk deprecate multiple agents. So these essentially are features that we have kind of put together so that it helps you to clean up whatever you have at this particular point of time. And then in remediation plan, basically people wanted some sorting. So essentially that was ordered. And these basically are basic features. There's one new feature which essentially we added, which is you can look at all the unquoted service paths. Like for example, if there is any unquoted service path in Windows, then essentially it kind of brings that out so that you can essentially remediate it. We are building the remediation plan for this, but this is right now there. So you can see all the unquoted services so that you can fix them up. The other thing was that there was always basically this question of when was the OS installed versus when was the BIOS installed, because the problem is that especially with VMware based machines, you basically get the BIOS from the VMware, which is a very old machine, while the machine could be installed very recently. So we have two fields which essentially declare what is the OS install date and the BIOS install date. And we've added basically the EPSS core reports in the standard report section as we promised, and some description fields in the Active Directory users. Now, coming to the next step, which is essentially then we said, okay, the new UI login, we should basically deploy. And the team came to me, they gave me a bunch of screens, and I'm going to just go through all of these screens. These screens all look familiar to you. These are all basically the screens. Now, as I looked through the screens, one of the things that I essentially said was, yeah, it seems to have a lot of screens. And I basically had a problem with this whole thing saying that this is too many screens. And then when I went back to Jason and others, asking them, what is it that we get from this new UI? The answer was that, yeah, it looks good. We can essentially have some theming and other pieces. So I'll just basically show you a view of the new UI here. So yeah, it has on the left-hand side this thing. And then over here, you have some theming options, which essentially says, okay, I can do this. I can change this color. I can change this, right? But it fundamentally does not make a difference in the way that we operate the application. And every time I need to release a new feature, one of the things that I basically notice, at least from where I stand, is that all the time I'm kind of struggling with this whole thing, saying that, okay, I develop a backend, I develop a front end, and then basically putting this together, then it is not exactly like how I want. It is basically different. And then basically people are not able to customize it. And this becomes basically a constant thing that I have to keep, that we keep going on about. So what we did was that we essentially said, well, I'm going to basically change this, right? I'm going to remove all of these menus and essentially, and this is where basically I'm asking for your feedback, right? So please look at it as an interactive session where, because we spent a lot of money in basically getting this new UI kind of through a UI UX person who basically came in, saw the UI, gave this thing about whole thing. But then it fundamentally did not change it. And then I essentially said, no, this cannot be what the people want. And this basically is exactly like 3 months down the line, we're going to be in the exact same state because everybody's going to be using this. But how have I changed the goalpost in this entire piece? And that's where essentially we came with this, right? So what if I essentially gave you one UI, which is basically forget about all these pieces, right? This is the UI. And then basically I just give you a cyber report, and then you basically kind of can navigate into the cyber report like this. You can essentially see what is there, what is the contents of your this thing. This essentially is your standard assessment report that we essentially convert into cyber report. But what it also does is this report is basically a live report, right? So I can essentially kind of look at what sections I want to go to, what sections I want to see. So for example, if I click on this, I basically get this particular section that which says what what are the compliances that basically I'm interested in. Now, over here, basically on top, you see a toggle button, right? This toggle button defines for you saying that whether you want to share this information with a customer or you do not want to share information with the customer, right? So this essentially is a metric that you essentially can use to basically say, don't want to share this information with the customer. So you can essentially navigate through the entire data. Now here is a page where you see basically a lock symbol, right? What does this mean? This lock symbol essentially means that you have no access to this data. So you don't see this particular page. And so in this way, essentially in one report, I can actually give you the complete data about a customer, or I can essentially give you the entire data of your MSP itself. And then I can basically bring widgets into this without actually changing all of this UI, bringing new components, bringing new stuff. All of that is not required because everything basically is part of this cyber book or cyber report or whatever we collectively choose to call it. Now, we also created basically another user interface, which is basically similar to this, where we said, yeah, the same UI. So for example, to just show you the stuff that you are familiar with, right? So for example, this is the UI for Active Directory. So we'll essentially kind of make it such that you can click on any of this and you can see all of the data. You can see your remediation plan right here. And you basically turn a page and then you can see the vulnerabilities by operating system. And each of this, for example, is essentially kind of linked. So I click on this, I can get to the vulnerabilities. So this essentially is basically a completely live system where you can essentially kind of share information, you can view information. You don't have to basically navigate through 20 menus to figure out where is this data, where is that data, what basically is the data that I can share, what is the data I cannot share, do I have permissions, don't I have permissions, all of this stuff, right? So this is basically part one of this thing, which is basically what you want to view. This is essentially the data that we essentially provide today, which is basically distributed in 10 different places. The second aspect of it, which basically I also basically was talking to the team, and I basically said, guys, I'm sick and tired of basically going back and forth in terms of every time basically saying that, okay, we created a screen and then there is a bug in the screen and this happened and people didn't understand how to configure this, how to essentially put this together. And second is that if you want to configure something, where do I find the configuration? Where do I find the settings? In settings, what is the sub menu? This is like, yeah, in 1950, 1980s, 1990s, we were doing it. But I think we are now in a stage where we have all ChatGPT, AutoGPT. And so essentially moving it out of this entire model of saying that I show you a plethora of things and then you have to find the right one, click it and configure it. Your next generation is going to be that you come in and say, how do I configure my ConnectWise integration? And then you have a screen like this. And then when you basically say, oh, I'm not clear about what is the private key, it basically gives you how to get the private key from ConnectWise. Okay. And the next step would essentially be to like launch your ConnectWise instance right from here and basically get you to the place where you have to launch a key. Now, this is the kind of workflow that we want to essentially kind of put together rather than essentially yet another UI, yet another this thing with just some different colors and tons of menus and all of those pieces. But before we do any of those pieces, what I would like to hear is that, is this something that's applicable or we have to go back to the old style of how my team has already done the work for this whole thing? Or should we essentially kind of focus and get this out? Because I at least believe that this will essentially improve everybody's productivity and it will essentially kind of become something that we can easily share, we can easily do things across, and then we will be able to, from a global carbon perspective, I can tell you this is going to save a ton of things because when we stop pulling down pages and JavaScripts which are not required, and we are basically getting the information that we need, and we basically are configuring the things that we need, we don't need 20 pages or 30 pages to keep popping up all the time. So that's my view, and I will shut up here. Let me get the...
Shiva, there's a few questions. You want to start going over them?
Yeah.
Question from Ben, self-hosted, will the same changes apply there?
Whatever is on the cloud will all happen to self-hosted. There is no, see, the way that we are doing the new build is Right now, we have few discrepancies here and there. All those discrepancies will disappear with this new build. There will be no difference between self-hosted and basically the cloud.
So Ben, I hope that addresses your question. Chris, do those with on-prem deployments who already have a custom domain need to do anything special? Or is it going to be to adopt this new custom settings, domain settings?
No, in terms of on-prem, you already have the capability to do that right on your system. So we'll basically put out a way by which you can do it on your own system. So the same thing will apply, and basically I'll basically send out a note out once, basically probably by tomorrow we'll send out a note on how to apply the custom domain on your in your self-hosted instance.
Tom's question on Acme protocol for custom domains so that the SSL certificates from Let's Encrypt can be automatically renewed every 3 months.
You want basically, if you want us to enroll with Let's Encrypt, we are happy to enroll, but the process of enrollment is essentially about creating the text record, etc. So if you've already enrolled, then essentially I think we can kind of do the auto renewals. I will basically work with the team to essentially get that in place, saying that this is part of, like, basically to have certbot done it for.
Yeah. Moving on, Amy, you know what I thought you wanted to share something. Please, can you come up and state that?
I just came from another cyber CMS kind of platform, and they had something we could give to the clients like that pamphlet that you showed, and that's what we've been looking for, and I didn't even know that was in the works. So I think it's a very good idea. It's something you can just hand somebody and they can you print it off?
Thank you.
Yeah, she's asking Sri if the resultant set of report data can be printed off once the modules are the requested modules are removed from view.
Yes.
Yes, I was just waiting for Shiva to chime in. Yeah, Shiva, go ahead.
No, I like to show you basically. So let me just get this here. So if you look this, so
while Shiva is doing that, let me add something that
yeah, sure.
As one who works with a couple hundred MSPs, and my guys print literally thousands of reports, it seems, every month. It's certainly hundreds. The ability to not only customize a report from a viewpoint, but also, from the historical customization on logos, hash values of the color set of the logos, and being able to create what amounts to a more direct proposal to the client, I think is significantly beneficial. And that's because one of the things that we always talk about is with Connect Secure, you've got a continuous vulnerability scanning, risk detection and analysis and platform, which is incredibly valuable. The whole real purpose is increasing security sales with the end client, right? And so the ability to cut off pieces that are either repetitive or don't speak to the narrative that the QBR or the monthly meeting with the end client you're trying to speak to, adds quite a bit of value in being able to focus specifically on the message that we're trying to carry to the end customer. When we present to banks or financial institutions, things where we're CISO, one of the hardest things to do is to present them the resultant set of data reports and be able to say to them, here's what you need to look at, but then somehow call out a microcosm of that data that they need to focus on and that we're trying to get them to move, additional security into. And so this will allow us to, in monthly reporting form, give them the reports that they need for compliance. But when we're presenting it to them, cut out pieces, maybe sometimes even significant portions of that report to focus solely on what we want them to see and comment on. And historically, we'd have to use a PDF editor and cut all those pieces out. And so this saves an incredible amount of time. And the last thing I want to add, and this is a little outside the scope, but one of the hardest things to get people to key into is, the ridiculous amount of security validation that has to happen for any, minor change to the interface, like implementing a chat GPT component. I mean, the amount of security validation that has to go into play, the amount of risk analysis has to go into play to avoid, any risk to a SOC 2 type 2, or just knowing what the risk may be or not be consumes a huge amount of time. And that's not talked about in these meetings because it's just not part of the topic of discussion, because it's something that the developer has to do. But it's as a person who participates in some of that stuff, it's just incredibly time consuming. And so I think, it's important to bring that up again. So that's the only comment I wanted to add, gents. Thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Jason.
Jason.
So you have the ability to print, the ability to share or unshare a report, the ability to download this report. You can basically, as I said, you can put an audio track, you can zoom the report, you can basically add comments to the report. All of that essentially will be provided. So it becomes like you can basically almost discuss the report, for example, as Jason was saying, with your CIO or customer. You're sending this report to 3 of them. They can basically kind of send you back comments. We can essentially create a mechanism by which essentially comments are visible only to you or essentially to everyone who's basically participating in this review. So these are all basically controls that we plan to add so that the whole experience of you doing a scan and basically giving the report, instead of basically being a static, like throw over the fence and throw over the email, becomes a experience where you're talking about it and people understand it. And when your customers understand it better, they essentially have more appreciation for basically what you have done for them, right? And that's essentially what we want to drive with this whole thing, because I basically just looked at the reports, right? And I was looking at like more than 150 reports, and still people were essentially saying we are still missing reports. And I'm like something seems to be amiss here, because the data is there, this thing is there. So let's give it to you in this form, and you switch on and switch off which part of the data you want to see, which you don't want to see. And basically then when you make that new report, what you present to customer A and what you present to customer B can be totally different, and that's a choice that you will make. But from my perspective, I basically also I'm just delivering components for you, so which also basically accelerates my development, because what then happens is I'm not sitting and developing these 50 UIs and going through testing those 50 UIs and trying to do all of that stuff. Rather, I'm just basically enabling a new component that basically appears in your report, and then you can decide whether you want to switch it on for a customer or don't want to switch it on for a customer, or customize it for a customer.
So Amy, I hope that addresses your question.
It most certainly does. I just have problems with cyber CNS and proving to insurance companies and to the endpoints that, we are doing our job and what we need to change. So I really appreciate it.
So next question, Chris Blunt, the report UI is something we may be able to share with customers, but in terms of using it day to day, I can see it being frustrating. I would like to be able to drill down to the features I want to get to quickly and not have to click the pages. And could you also ensure have a way to turn menu options on or off? That create your own menus, so you can add the features that you use often. Shiva?
Yeah, that can be done. See, the point is that, like, if you look at what we are doing basically here, we basically, the whole idea is this, right? You have essentially kind of a table of contents, and then you can essentially kind of go directly to wherever you want to go, rather than essentially kind of being stuck with the next kind of paradigm, right? So you will do the next sometimes, but basically then you go directly to where you want to go. You don't need to essentially kind of follow the paradigm of having to go to any place, but it gives us one place where we can essentially kind of get you to essentially go anywhere that you want into the space.
Moving on. Yeah, I think Larry has James also say the same. Is there a possibility to play around with the new UI in some way in a hosted demo site, if you will, so that people can give feedback?
Yeah, so we are going to basically open this up, like once we've kind of done a little bit more of development of this, we will essentially we'll put a beta test site with a couple of agents and everything so that people can experience the UI. And then post that, we'll essentially take feedback and then put this new UI up and down.
Got it. I think the last question is from Patrick. When is the new UI coming out?
So this particular UI that you're seeing, which basically is like all of this. See, the good part about this UI is it has all these options. And then, for example, I can essentially say this is enterprise, and then you will essentially kind of the view changes and you can essentially look at your UI this way. So all of this basically can be released as I tell you next week. So I think we can make a release of this next week, but essentially I'm thinking of basically just waiting for probably another 2 to 3 weeks and basically releasing the whole handbook, because that UI will essentially kind of make it more simpler and it is more logistically there. And as I said, we will essentially kind of be hosting this separate from the UI that you have right now, so that you can get adjusted, acclimatized. And once basically you're acclimatized, that's when we are basically going to shut down the old UI and old instance. So that's essentially the plan that we have for moving it forward. So any other questions?
I think we're caught up on questions. Yes.
Perfect. So what I would say is that, like, folks, basically, I don't know whether this thing, but I really would like to basically get some feedback in terms of would you guys basically want like just basically a reaction on your chat to say whether you like basically you want us to go ahead and release the old UI, which essentially is there, or basically would you like the new UI? Just a thumbs up in case you like the new one, a thumbs down if you like the old one, no problem. Yep.
Yeah, I think perhaps a try would be with a little bit of documentation will certainly help so that we don't, launch without those basic things. But I think that's what seems to be the consensus. Yeah.
Yeah. So James, we will make an online demo, and we'll basically make it available to everyone so that you can log in and see it. And then I'll do that by the end of this week, and then next week we can essentially kind of take a consensus and then move forward.
Awesome. Yeah. So we are fully caught up. Oh, I'm sorry. One question. Is there an ATA when the new EPS scoring will be used to for the risk scores and for the PS integration for opening a ticket for remediation?
Yes, that is already developed. It is basically scheduled to go out this week. It was already a ticket. So basically, that's there was a ticket that was raised on it, so that was addressed, and I think by the end of this week you will see it in this thing.
So Luke, I hope that answers your question. Perfect. Yeah, we're caught up. So Shivani, closing thoughts?
No, just basically saying thanks to everyone. Basically, please, I'll send out the link where we host this. Please give us your feedback, because I think, as I said, we look at you folks as basically people who are driving this product. And my philosophy is basically just like what the Tesla's philosophy is, right? It's basically, we want to build a product that basically is used by you and basically you're happy using it. Now, if somebody uses whatever we are developing to develop a better cyber technology, then I'm happy that they will succeed and that is all fine with me. But I want to make sure that we essentially kind of take your feedback and make sure that this product delivers on what are the key pain points that you have. So I would again thank you all for your feedback and thank you for taking time to come over to this meeting.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your time. Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.